All right, and welcome to our Managing Relationships webinar. During this 20 to 30 minute webinar, we will be thinking about how to better manage and maximize relationships while you're in college. And we're going to define relationships as friends, family, significant others, professional relationships, whatever the case may be. There are ways to build healthy, strong relationships, and there are ways that relationships take on very specific forms while you're in your college years. So we're going to go over some principles today, some common pitfalls, and so forth. So let's get right into it. So this is being presented to you by Navigate College Now. Just a little bit about us. Navigate College Now is an educational consulting firm offering products and services that develop students into high-impact, organized, and urgent thinkers and doers in college settings and beyond. And just a little background about what that is. We're interested in building college leaders, students who take advantage of all available campus resources and are very proactive about their futures. These students go on to get internships, fellowships, jobs, research opportunities, leadership roles, and so forth. So we're interested in building that type of student through products and services, ebooks, consulting, workshop, webinars like the one we're having today, and we're going to continue to do that work. So let's just go through a quick agenda. Some key things to remember. We'll go over those first. We'll go into some common pitfalls that college students typically have about building relationships or not building relationships. We'll go into some foundations and some founding principles to kind of address some of those common pitfalls. And we'll go over a checklist that will give us kind of a curriculum of what to work off of. And we'll apply those to relationships in the family, friendships and peerships, significant others, and then professional relationships. And then we'll close out there. So some keys to remember. The first is that every individual is different, obviously, and that you have to mix and match everything we learned today based on what works for you. So we won't obviously be able to go over everything that deals with managing relationships in 20 to 30 minutes. You couldn't do it in a day. You couldn't do it in a week. But you can take some things you hear, take some things you already know, and kind of pair those together to get a strategy that works best for you. The next thing is evaluating relationships takes honesty and maturity for all parties involved. So whatever you hear today has to be processed with all the people that you deal with and the environments that you're in, the communities you're a part of. So maybe a good idea is to share them the webinar after we're done and the recorded version is up, because that way you can have some kind of consensus and understanding about the way you're managing and approaching relationships with people you have. So what we'll learn today are good tools, but in order for them to work and actually have meaning and impact, everyone has to kind of have some kind of agreement about them, which is what we hope to build today. The third thing is possessing a true sense of self is not optional when engaging others. So in order to build any kind of healthy, strong relationships, you have to have a really good sense of yourself and how others experience that, so that you know what you're dealing with and you know what you have to work on and things of that nature. So a process of self-reflection, as we have in one of our 5 P's in the personal, is going to continue to be important no matter what we do. And the last point to remember and key disclaimer is that managing relationships is a lifelong challenge. We'll learn some tools today that you can apply to your semester, apply to your rest of your college years and beyond. But it has to be an ongoing commitment, and you have to find it to be an obligation to continue to learn how to better manage relationships and so forth. All right, so first, common pitfalls. So the number one common pitfalls that college students face with managing relationships as they're trying to develop, grow, and adapt is that they take advantage, and take for granted people, places, and moments. A lot of times with busy schedules, a lot of times with changing attitudes, changing mindsets and personalities, you can also kind of sometimes not assess who you have in front of you, what you have in front of you. And a lot of times we can go through the motions of college life and kind of take for granted those people, places, and moments. So you definitely don't want to do that. And another common pitfall is that college students especially are afraid to build relationships around explicit needs. Oftentimes this kind of is found to be acceptable in the professional world when they talk about networking and things like that we'll talk about later and that we talk about in detail in our book and so forth. But it's not a bad thing to kind of find it purposeful, meaningful to have explicit needs around which you're involved and engaged with others, to know why you're here. Essentially, I know why I'm here. You know why you're here. It's not a bad thing to embrace that and to bring meaning to that. A third common pitfall is letting your personality determine what kind of relationships you're able to have with people. So personal tendencies, personalities, and so forth are important, but they don't determine if a relationship can be healthy or not. Because if you have a curriculum, you have some foundations by which you operate, any relationship can thrive. So here are some of those foundations of good relationships. Purpose and intention. We talked about earlier how a common pitfall is to not define purpose and intention. Is to not know why you're here. So that's one of the first good foundations of a relationship, is that you have to have purpose and intention. You have to bring meaning and actualize the reason that you're here, the timeline for that you'll be in a relationship, the conditions by which you will be abiding by, and what the intended goals are. Communication. Obviously, you hear this one a lot. Channels of communication become increasingly important as you try to build strong, healthy relationships in your college life and from people both past, present, and future. So it's really important to have channels of communication open and honest channels of communication. Reciprocity. So a lot of times when relationships, we think about even balance. What are you giving? What are you taking? So that's another important part of building good relationships. And flexibility. As we talked about earlier, you're adapting, you're adjusting, you're growing. Flexible relationships are very, very important when you want to think about what you're doing with others, what you're trying to build with others, and what will be necessary to sustain that relationship. So here's our checklist for good relationships. Obviously, this checklist can be as long as you want it to be or as short as you want it to be, but there are some things that belong on it, so we'll just give you 4 today. On our 4 are 1, a clear agreed upon goal and measure of accountability that accompanies them. So this is basically saying that you have to have that intention, that purpose, and set clear goals and ways that you're going to make sure you check in with yourself and with others collectively to make sure that you're accountable to your original goals and intentions. The second one is communication, obviously, and a good relationship will have an insistence upon communication, even in the presence of discomfort. So we know communication is not always easy. It's not always the first thing we want to do and the thing we want to do well, but it's definitely something that has to be done. So a good relationship will have that insistence upon communication. As far as reciprocity goes, an honest assessment of the capacity and willingness to meet the needs of others that are taking place in the relationship is really important. So sometimes you just can't do certain things, or you can't be available in certain ways, or you cannot meet the needs and agreed upon terms of what you did. For example, in that first checklist, when you set goals and measures, you can't always live up to those, or not willing to, for a variety of different reasons. So it's really, really important to have an honest assessment about how you're doing, how you're meeting those goals, the capacity to do it going forward, and your willingness to do it going forward. This is when communication comes in, because then maybe readjusting those terms or doing whatever is necessary to make sure that you maintain the relationship. And lastly, on the note of flexibility, having obvious ways that the relationship has shifted and evolved as those involved have moved throughout time is really important. So as you change and as you're growing and adapting as a college student, as an adult, as a thinker, obviously the relationship that you have should shift as well. And it's something that will be very important as you want to assess and evaluate relationships. So you should see ways and apparent ways that it's shifted and then it's brought new meaning. So let's apply that to the family. So oftentimes people have family members who care for them, who are supportive, or they cannot be supportive. There are a variety of different family dynamics, obviously, that college students face. But usually people have some kind of family member or caretaker that is important to them and cares about them. And as you go to college, those relationships take on a different form. Distance, new thoughts, new mindsets, all those things come into play when dealing with family. So some questions that you should ask yourself, and some questions you should be wondering and pondering over, are: one, how are my relationships with family members and caretakers evolving as I evolve? So this goes back to flexibility. The things about you, the relationships that you have with family members should not stay the same. Who you are at 21, 22 is not who you were at 16, 15, 14. And the things you require and the things they require even will not be the same. How intentional am I about checking in? Do I need to be checking in with? So this is another important thing, because communication, even talking time, how long you're talking to family members and checking in, letting each other know that you're all right. How intentional are you about doing that? Oftentimes it can be hard for some people to make sure that they're doing that, checking in, because of just day-to-day life and trying to get through. And that's understandable, but it has to be intentional. You have to make sure you set aside time, because once again, you want to take those relationships for granted. And also, how can I leverage my position as a college student to better assist those that I love and care for? So recognizing that you as a college student, you in a new environment, you getting exposed to new things, is valuable to family members and those family relationships that you have. That oftentimes we can do more and have a different kind of relationships with family members that is fruitful and productive. A lot of students, for example, like to bring their family experiences and things like that into research that they do. So if they are busy doing research and getting grants doing research in college, that doesn't mean that they have to spend less time dealing with family or thinking about family. A lot of times people bring their households and different experiences into the work that they do, so that they can better answer questions that their family has had for a long period of time, or just address different issues that they've had. A lot of times students find great resources in college to do so. So next we're on friendships and peerships. So we don't define friendships. We let everyone define them, but we define peerships as the things that you don't consider friendships. So oftentimes people have lines that they draw based on trust, time spent developing a relationship, and other things like that, to where they can maybe set aside peers, versus their friends. And some people don't make that distinction. So it just depends on the person. But we like to kind of bring in both, because some things that you do with students across your campus, some working groups that you're in, and things like that, you might not necessarily consider them close friends, but they are definitely important people, and have meaning in the college experience. So here are some things you should be thinking about with those kind of relationships. How do I define friendships, and what do I contribute to them? And this can apply to peerships as well. So knowing your self-definition, knowing the terms and conditions of friendship for you and peership, and knowing what you contribute to those to make sure that they exist is really important. In what areas of my day-to-day life do I engage in peerships, and why aren't they my friends? So here's a question for those who, if you have a line that you draw, if you have some distinctions that you make, what are those distinctions? Perhaps you shouldn't be making them all the time. If you have a set of people that you work with on a normal basis, and you do project-based work with and things like that, or your research partners or other people like that, where's the hesitance towards going to a different level with them and bringing them in as your friends? Oftentimes this is a good thing to do. This is organic and this is natural to a college experience, and these can be some of your best friends. So don't be afraid to kind of, if possible, break those barriers down, break those lines down. And the last one will be, what parts of these relationships are fostering my growth and development? So obviously our friends and stuff like that, a lot of it is social, and that's a great part, and it's very important to have social relationships with other people, even if they're aside from any kind of particular growth and development that you're doing. But growth and development is broadly defined, and friends and peers and other students you're around can definitely foster that. So knowing that the ways that these relationships do that is important, and requiring that they do that, as often sometimes college students are afraid to do. You want to find like-minded individuals that's going to contribute to your growth and development, and having a good network and base of these people only takes you further than you could ever imagine. So next is significant others. And we, once again, broadly define this. Obviously, people get involved with different people on different terms, have different situations, dynamics, and rules that they abide by. So we don't try to necessarily get into these specifics. However, there are some things and some healthy things that we think you can bring to these relationships and require of them. So is there trust present? Obviously, things like trust, integrity, honesty are very important with dealing with significant others. But also, are these relationships structured so that I can maximize my college experience? So you want to recognize that you still are there for certain reasons, and then are the other people, for example, that are involved in this kind of relationship. And it's important to know and make sure and be intentional about structuring those relationships so that you can take advantage of everything that you're doing, respect your time, and value other parts that are very time sensitive. You only have 4 years for most people to get their degree, and making sure that you get the most out of what you can alongside significant others can be really important, and then making sure that everyone's supportive to you doing so. And also, is there a difference in significance that these relationships take as opposed to other relationships? So oftentimes we're having, I don't know how many relationships simultaneously, and our web of relationships, web of people that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis can be, very, very extensive. However, sometimes we'll prioritize certain kinds of relationships over others. Some people prioritize professional relationships over all kind of relationships, or some people prioritize just their family relationships over all kind of relationships. I put it on this slide specifically because oftentimes it seems almost natural to prioritize the person who we're involved with, maybe romantically or anything like that, over all kinds of relationships. And you want to make sure that there's balance. There's balance, and that there's a healthy balance present. So professional relationships, this is something like people usually like to get excited about when we think about college students and getting jobs and internships and networking. And this is something that we can go into detail with at Navigate College Now. But for the purposes of quick assessment and quick things you should be thinking about, have I made my intentions around contribution and gain clear? So this is, like I said earlier, one of those kind of relationships where it's acceptable to be very clear about your intentions and what you want from it. And the whole nature of the relationship is based upon people deciding in those terms and making sure that those things are happening. So it's more acceptable, it's more natural for people to define intention and contribution here. But I think you can do this in all kinds of relationships, but you definitely want to do it in this one. And also, how purposeful and innovative am I about establishing these relationships? So recognizing that everyone is trying to do this kind of relationship at this point in their lives, and at this point they're trying to do it as far as college students and moving forward. But how different am I being about establishing these relationships and making sure that I stand out in that way? It's very important for professional relationships because professional relationships are people's go-to in this point of life. And it's very important that you have a different approach and that you make yourself available in that way. So we work with students on that kind of thing, on networking and making themselves stand out, branding, and so forth. And the last thing we think about is, do I have people that can attest to my overall work ethic and impact? So this is obviously important for things like recommendations. If you apply to fellowships, internships, jobs, all kind of positions like that, you always will need good recommenders. Overall impact is people. We have to think about professional relationships as more than just adults, for example, who've been in their fields for 20 or 30 years. That we have to think of ourselves as having colleagues and peers as college students, because there are professional relationships that we're developing as we're in college, as we're working on projects, as we're in different leadership positions, and we're kind of making a name for ourselves alongside others and assessing each other in that way. And these people will be important in the long run to be able to attest to your overall work ethic, overall impact, and influence in your college environments and in communities, and they're very important. So you want to make sure that you broaden who you think of as being able to qualify as a professional relationship with you. That's very, very important to do. So that will be all for this specific specific webinar. And one thing that you can do particularly is get our how-to guide to maximizing your college's resources. It's a comprehensive guide, and it goes over lots of things that we talked about today as far as managing relationships, defining people's places and things proximity to you, which is a very important part of managing relationships. And this is available on our website, navigatecollegenow.com. And also, we have a special deal going. Alright, so that's an introductory deal we have going on right now. So if you go to navigatecollegenow.com/intro deal, you can find that. And what that is a 2-hour consulting package that goes with an ebook, and that will allow you to have some targeted assistance. For example, if you're interested in what we talked about today with managing relationships and thinking over relationships you have and how they can be improved, we can try to do some of that work with you over things that are talked about today or other concerns that you have, and the ebook will be provided to you as well, and that will give a good guide to do many of the things that we talked about today. So if you want to be able to find that deal, once again, it's on navigatecollegenow.com, and a good way to kind of go about finding that deal is on our website right here. So if you see our website and you're on the web page, on the front page, you just scroll down. You can find it right here, actually. Products and services, we'll have our deal underneath right here, and if you click to purchase, you can easily just buy the deal right from here, and we'll reach out to you, get details scheduled, and so forth. So that'll be all for today. Thank you all for joining us. This will be uploaded on our YouTube channel along with our other webinars that you can find on our YouTube channel. Like, share, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you.